Rolling sound, quiet. Here we go. Read it. 126.7. And starting right and action.
Hi, everyone. Chad Matthews from Fort Worth, Texas with the Lone Star Film Festival. Thank you for joining us for this film talk. Today, we're going to speak with writer-director Kristen Atwell-Ford, and this is going to be moderated by my former professor at TCU, Mr. Richard Allen. The film that we're going to be discussing is the documentary film called Riders on the Purple Sage, the making of a Western opera. It's a great film. I highly recommend checking it out. If you haven't watched it yet, make sure to watch it during the festival run through Sunday. So without further ado, let's get our guests on here, and we'll start the panel discussion. I'm going to remove myself and let you guys talk.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks. Kristen, this is so exciting to be able to talk to you and ask you, when you see a film that you love, especially one that's as rich with so much going on, you have so many questions for the filmmaker, and to get to be able to ask you the questions and not even have to have an audience here. I could just ask you whatever I want. I mean, I love an audience, but I really have a lot to ask you about this film. So it's obviously a labor of love. I mean, here there's a film, you treat the work itself, the opera, lovingly. You treat the creators lovingly. You treat the entire project lovingly. And then I saw you're listed as a co-producer of the actual production itself, of the opera. So if you could tell me a little bit about how you got into the project and what your involvement with on that level, and at what point you decided this is going to be a documentary.
Well, Richard, first of all, thank you so much for having me. We're delighted to be part of the Lone Star Film Festival with you and Chad and everyone in Fort Worth. This project started over a birthday dinner for me in 2012, and my dear friend, composer Craig Baumler, was telling me about this novel that he had discovered, Zane Grey's novel, Riders of the Purple Sage. And he started telling me the story of Jane Witherstein out on the Arizona-Utah border, fighting for her land and her water and her cattle. And my vision just filled with Ed Mell's artwork. And Ed Mell is an Arizona-based landscape painter. He's collected all over the world, and he has kind of a modernist style of landscape paintings. He actually works in two styles, modernist and realistic, but his geometric shapes just really capture the feeling of the landscape. And I said to Craig, if you don't know this painter, I'm going to give you his book. And Craig immediately said, yes, this is the fifth main character in the story, which is the landscape and the way that the landscape shapes us and shapes our character. And from there, Craig didn't even have a commission for the opera yet, but I asked him, do you mind if I make a documentary film about how you make an opera? Because it's such a large communal art form that encompasses all of the other art forms, and it's so complex and yet so detailed. I just thought it would be a really interesting journey. And so
really the opera itself was your idea?
No. The opera was fully Craig Baumler's idea.
He came to you saying, I'm thinking about doing an opera on this book.
And librettist Stephen Mark Cohen were working on the opera, and he was telling me about this new piece he was working on. He had never planned to write another opera. He has deep musical theater roots and is very celebrated American composer. And this piece, as he put it, just sang to him. When he told me his story and his journey with this piece, I saw the visual component with Ed Mell.
Yeah. And that's one of the remarkable things about this, because first of all, when you're watching the movie, it's such a tribute. Every segment of the movie seems like the movie is about that person or that aspect. So the Ed Mell segment comes on, I'm like, I felt stupid for not knowing his work. And yet it seemed familiar to me. Yeah. But I felt this is a major influential artist. And he was such a cool guy too, because he was so humble and obviously so accomplished. And you see the art and you see that early on. And then when it explodes on the screen as part of the opera, it sent chills because if I could have done any, I've written a few musicals in my life and they haven't gone too far. And I tried to start we actually produced a musical in Fort Worth about the Chisholm Trail, and we won't go into that.
Cool.
We had visions, and these visions sprung to life with you in such a masterful way. And yeah, I was wondering about that because Ed Mel's art was such, even if that had been the only reason alone for the production, it would have been worth it. And yet it was just a piece to this. Did you know Ed Mel personally before that?
Well, I was friends with the mother of his children, and I used to go to Ed Mel's gallery openings. He has a show every year in Phoenix. And I would get the brochure and I would cut it up and put little Ed Mel pictures in frames. That's where my Ed Mel collection started.
Already though, working with him. So,
well, I was an admirer. I was one of his many fans, and so I was aware of his work. And when we went to Craig and I went to talk to Ed, and we're thinking maybe we can license some of his skies for the background. And Ed, and you get it in the film, he's just the coolest. He says, well, I've done a stamp and I've always wanted to do an opera or a musical. And he said, who's doing your hard sets? And Craig and I walked out of his studio, which just to go to his studio and see what he has around him to inspire him is a complete education. We walked out of his studio and we're like, did Ed Mel just sign on to an opera that has no production to do the entire scenic design? And so everybody, this project, the opera itself just had this momentum. Everyone said yes, and it was just such a positive building energy that really brought in the entire community of Phoenix and Greater Arizona because we're telling our story.
Now, and at which point, because this opera company, that was a beautiful theater that they were in, and that's their home theater.
Well, the Arizona Opera Company works out of several theaters in the state, in Phoenix and Tucson. That is Phoenix Symphony Hall, and Phoenix Symphony Hall is really, really lovely. Yeah.
How did it come together? Okay, so the opera came first, and you said Craig had a background with musical. I'm a pretty big musical theater fan. Has he written book and lyrics to other shows? He
has. I think I believe he won the Olivier Award for Enter the Guardsman in the late 80s or early 90s, and that was performed in London's West End. He wrote Gunmetal Blues, some other things with Stephen Mark Cohen, his librettist. These guys are like, so what I say about the film is I follow the artistic process of three American masters, author Zane Grey, painter Ed Mel, and composer Craig Baumler. You just don't know Craig Baumler yet, but he's influenced by Carlisle Floyd and Leonard Bernstein, and I mean he's got deep American roots.
You can hear that in the music. Just when it was unbelievable that you get a hunger to see the actual show, and you started so brilliantly by giving us a taste of it, and we know okay. Good. We see it. It's gonna open. We know that. And as a person who's been on the other side, that relieves that anxiety of like, you don't want this to be lost in La Mancha. You don't want to expect the thing that never happened.
Right.
So you see, okay, it's going to happen. Now let's see how we got there. Well, and then you want to see a piece of it, and you show us such a wonderful part of it that it really makes you want to see the whole thing. But you walk away from your film feeling like you've gotten a sense of it.
Oh, well, it's lovely to hear you speak about it and how you've responded to it, because that's what you hope is as Craig says, the audience, it's not complete until the audience experiences it. And it's very ironic that you would mention Lost in La Mancha, because our consulting editor, Jacob Bricca, worked on that film.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
And the audience who doesn't know, Lost in La Mancha is a documentary about Terry Gilliam trying to make a film that he is unable to make. And it's interesting because Gilliam's goal in that is to bring all these different artistic pieces together. And he has a brilliant vision, but he doesn't know how to work in a team way to translate it. And in your film, you see the egos are just melt, and the whole thing is about the project. And I teach, and I think this is what students that once everybody puts the project and their vision of the whole above themselves and their contribution, you can come out with something really beautiful. And your film is that way too, because your film is its own, just living in and of itself, it has that feeling of collaboration to it.
Well, I'm a big team player, and I really wanted to look at an artistic idea that started with one person, which was Craig Baumler, the composer. He brought in the librettist, and then the music and the book become the spine of this art piece that's fleshed out by all of these other people pouring their hearts into it. And everyone you see is a lifetime of training and practice to arrive at that moment when it's live on stage together. I feel like this film is a big metaphor for collaboration and what we can accomplish when we work together toward higher goals.
Yes, and when your heart is so invested. And really, I love musical theater. I've never really taken to opera, and usually I just have to admit I've gone to operas. But this, I was watching this, I'm like, I get this. I get this as an opera, and I get this story, and it's enough like musical theater. The music was enough. And I don't know if you consider it an insult or a compliment to be compared to Lloyd Webber, but I felt some of that Phantom kind of feeling, and the Les Mis from those composers. I felt that. My son is also writes musicals. He had a musical off Broadway last year.
Congratulations.
And we went through that process together also. And to see it come to fruition so beautifully, and for it to be all music and lyrics. And I want to ask you about that part of it, because watching that, there's that wonderful scene where they come up with that dialogue about, you haven't gotten married yet.
You're not a young woman, Jane. Yes.
Yeah, right. And then they say, that's true. Now and then we get to see it actually play out in the opera itself. Can you tell me, did you have them reenact that conversation?
So first off, that I love that moment, and that was before we had a budget. We were shooting on one camera, and we had a camera move right in the middle of that scene. And my partner, Bill Davis, is a real stickler for production quality. And I wanted it to play through so that you could see that this was the moment that this librettist is so brilliant, Stephen Mark Cohn, that they're struggling with this line, and it pops out. He comes up with this line that works perfectly with the meter of the musical phrase. And we cut around it to make the cut cleaner. But that moment in particular was very, very important to me to get as close to as possible to their creative process. And I want to say something a little bit about opera and musical theater. They used devices from musical theater in the score, just like you said. They have what Wagnerian motifs. So each character has a motif. The gun has a motif in the music. When they got to what's it? Three people singing. It's not a quintet. It's not a quartet, or it's a quintet. No, that would be five. Anyway, at the end, there are all these people singing. They laid out the quartet from West Side Story to see how that was balanced, which I love that part of their process. And so we would always jokingly say, this opera is the gateway drug opera for musical theater people who don't think they like opera.
Absolutely.
And for me and my husband, we went to see our first operas when this project started, and we were like, they threw the wrong baby in the fire and 40 people are standing still on stage. I don't relate. And the thing that really swept me up about this piece, Riders of the Purple Sage, is here's an American opera about the settling of the West and using all the motifs and storylines that Zane Grey popularized in the early part of the 20th century that heavily, heavily, heavily influenced Hollywood films. And so this is our story. We recognize this story, and I was hoping Texans would love it because we love a good cowboy story. And the individual setting out to make their mark on life.
And I think it's so interesting what you said about the creation of the Western through the Hollywood film, because there is that West that it has the writers like Zane Grey and filmmakers like John Ford created that we imagine. And it seems you're right that this larger than life opera where things are sung and the emotions are so, it fits perfectly together. You wouldn't think it would. It seems like a very odd combination. And it almost seems like you're going to watch a like a gimmicky thing. Like this is going to be a gimmick.
Right. It's not singing cowboys. There's a long tradition of that. But I asked Craig and Stephen, why was this an opera and not a musical theater? And he said the scope of the emotion really needed to be sung through, because otherwise Lasseter would show up and he said, I'm looking for my sister. I'm so sad. And then it wouldn't move. They really fit the medium to the story and vice versa. And I think it is an accessible piece that's going to bring new audiences to opera.
You certainly sold it that way. I mean, if films up to invest in it and want to do the show, you did that alone. Because I think you're right. You took somebody who was saying, I mean, for me, I'm like, I love the elements of this, but how is this going to come together?
Right.
And you walk away thinking,
right.
Oh my God, what a vision. How could this not come together? And I want to see more of it and more things like it. I guess it reminded me when I went to Bass Hall and saw the Rodeo, the ballet.
Oh.
Aaron Copland, I think it is. Or Chad can edit it out if I'm all wrong about it. But it's a Western ballet.
That might be Agnes DeMille.
She was the choreographer.
And then the music maybe was probably from Baron Copland because they're the same era.
So that's what, and then that to me was sort of related to Oklahoma, and this was sort of related to those things. Like cowboys are singing, and we're not laughing at it; we're singing with it. So when you were working on this, because to me, the world of documentary filmmaking is so all-encompassing, and you have to put that together. And the show's coming together, and you obviously love the show and a co-producer. And how did that process work? You're obviously working on them simultaneously. Did you clone yourself? How did you do all that?
It was a hefty run up to the opera itself. We shot for almost a month straight once they were actually in rehearsal. This project, as of 2020, that's 8 years. So the tricky part was we'd shot so much before the opera went up, and I got very attached to a lot of that stuff. And then we found that the center of gravity for the piece is much more the closer you get to opening night and the opera going up live on stage. And so it was a lot. We had a lot of footage, and I learned a lot of things about what you need to shoot and what you don't. But I'm a documentarian as well as a filmmaker, and we've got it documented. I can tell you that.
So you shot, how much did you have, because it's so well structured, how much did you have the structure in mind? At what point did that structure gel? Did you have an outline for it as you started? At which point did it come together? Because mathematically, it just adds up right.
Well, I learned, my partner, Bill Davis, was pushing me in 2016 to rough cut everything we had so that we knew what we needed. Unfortunately, I had a family member who was ill, and I was off the project for several months, and she's great and everything's good, but it was definitely challenging. Once the opera went up and I went back to the footage, I thought, oh my gosh, Bill was absolutely right. I should have been rough cutting we had been cutting promos, and we had been fundraising, and we had been playing with pieces, but that really daunting, like, how is this going to structure? It didn't quite structure the way I saw it in my head. I really saw it starting with Craig and then everyone adding on, like he and the music were the spine. But we also had some really I have a graduate degree in licensing orchestral music, and it took almost 2 years to license the music, and we actually have 2 licenses, one for seeing the orchestra playing the music and one for hearing the music as underscoring. And I was really, really, really dedicated to finding a way to use the score as underscore so that we would have that big Western Hollywood movie sound, and that we would also stay connected to the process of the opera while we were out in the landscape.
There's no score, there's no music in that soundtrack that's from outside the opera, is there?
Not a bit. And believe me, I had people saying, even Craig was saying, well, I have Mountain Days, and he was rolling through, I've Haunting of Winchester, you can use this music or that music. And I'm like, how can you not be attached?
It's really
I want to hear writers.
But your brilliance as commercially too, because I know the more when you hear that music throughout the movie, you're not registered, you like it, you're enjoying whatever you're hearing, but you're not focused on it. So then when you see the opera, that music is very familiar to you because you've been watching it for 80 minutes or whatever up until that point. So that was very, very, very smart of you because it really got you hooked. I have to say that dramatically, what caught me, the artist part of me, was I'm watching this movie and I'm watching this art develop, and I'm so impressed by them and so jealous of them. And then they come to the technology and that light board comes in.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is like the Act 2 plot point that's going to shake everything up for them.
The LED screen, yeah.
Yeah, the LED, and you hadn't really, I mean, you worry, like, is this going to ruin everything because it gets in the way of the art? And there's this moment when you come to the 2 techies and they're like, piece of cake. We know how to do this and it's going to look great. And suddenly it's like magic. Like it takes Mel's art and it makes it larger, big enough operatic size. And then from that point on, it's just part of the picture. But it's such a realistic. My wife loves the HGTV shows. It's like the part in Love and Lister when Hillary's like, we're not going to be able to go on. But it was really believable. I thought, this is a problem. And yet, so I really liked the fact that there was no forced drama on the part where the director, when it was her grandmother passed during the film. Yeah, and it was not exploitative like a reality show, but it was really done with dignity, and you happened to be there for genuine moments, it seemed, and her professionalism of how she said she dealt with it. She accepted it and moved on. So many life lessons about what it takes to create something that's bigger than you and that what you believe in. And by starting back with Zane Grey, even if you just took the Zane Grey part and said, here's a little documentary about Zane Grey, that works.
Yeah.
And yet then you say, but it keeps going, it resonates beyond. How did the actors feel watching their performances? Because they're used to their opera, they're singers, and now you brought them into this different format where they see themselves in costume singing on a screen. Did they appreciate that?
I think they did. Everybody was game. I mean, we had such incredible access and support to do what we were doing. And I think, so many of these singers are young singers who are coming up in their career, and they're part of our new American treasure of performers. And I think they appreciated, they know, especially coming into this year, which was such a surprise, that what everyone's doing has to translate to some kind of screen and some kind of filmed environment. And I think they got a big kick out of it. And as we're on the festival circuit, we're going to start rolling out a lot of our outtakes and other moments, and they're all in. And you can really tell the actors who have the singers who have acting training as well. It really shows up in their performance.
I have to tell you that the curtain call was really emotional for me, because the last 3, and especially when she bows, and you know how she worked that, and it wasn't about her ego, it was just this work. She was just so dedicated to this piece. And because the guy who plays Lassiter, we saw a little bit of his actor personality, and it was fun. He was good, but she was just like the artist. I mean, she bows and they all stand up for her. I was giving her a standing ovation at home, and I was giving you one too, because I really think that it builds to this crescendo where art, music, theater, and then I just want to say, I know Chad is here, but when I looked at your bio and I saw that you were also a wilderness guide.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were able to start with your love of the land and your love of Arizona and nature and say, this is how art translates that.
Yeah. You got it. You got it, Richard. You're the perfect viewer. Thank you.
Well, it's like a really perfect documentary for someone who appreciates all these things but hasn't seen them to come together that way. And I'm so glad Chad asked me to be the one to meet you, because I would have been the person at the end of the screening coming up to you and asking you questions, and you'd be trying to be nice, but everybody else is there. So I got you to myself for a half hour. So
it's just a delight, and what a boost to me and to everyone who's been separated and isolated right now. I just can't tell you how much I enjoy this and appreciate it.
Thank you for that artistic contribution and for sharing it with us as this beautiful documentary.
Yes, thank you for giving us access to this wonderful documentary. And again, like I mentioned earlier, please go check out this film. It's well worth the view. So thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you both.
Appreciate it.
Everything was good until Lassiter rode into town.
They made me the gunman, the man in black, Lassiter.
Out here, these people, they're tough. And everyone in our opera is tough.
This form of opera is theater at a grand level. We're not speaking about our emotions, we are singing about our emotions.
We had a child in the air, a beautiful girl, and I know Millie loves that child with all of her heart.
It was the end of the day. I thought, gee, I think I'll read some Zane Grey. So I pulled up 28 titles on Kindle, and there was Riders of the Purple Sage. And if you're a composer, you know Riders of the Purple Sage.
When you think about the time period that Zane Grey started writing, the West was still the West.
All the tropes that we take for granted from Western movies, those all had to be kind of invented. Zane Grey's the first one to put those components together in a meaningful way, and it's no accident that 112 movies were made from his books.
He defined the West in our minds and in our hearts, not just for Americans, but worldwide.
We are attracted to the loner with a gun who makes his own law and battles forces that are bigger than he is.
What the hell's going on here? Get your goddamn hands off that woman! How dare you draw on me, you son of a bitch! I could end you right here!
Please, don't kill him! And there will probably be those people who think, a Western for opera, is that appropriate?
As an artist, a subject matter, you got to have something that's got, for me anyway, that has a lot of grandeur and a lot of drama to the forms.
There are so many different elements. We have the lighting, we have the scenic artists, we have the actual singers themselves, we have all the visual aspects, we have all of the musical forces. My role as a director is to bring all of the different components together in a way that can tell the story from one point of view.
When you're performing, you want an audience that's living and breathing, that's breathing with you, that is reacting, that is fueling what you're doing on stage.
It's so rewarding to be part of a new work, but it's also a great responsibility because you want so desperately to get it right.
There's a saying in the theater, it goes, what makes today different than any other day? today was different because Lassiter rode into town and asked some questions. And people could no longer be the same.
And I will never see this hardened land again.